Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's Week 2 preview show, brought to you by QuinnBet. In these heady weeks, of course, before the bye week, we have a full 16-game slate, all 32 teams once again in action this weekend. On this show, though, we have 15 games to discuss. We'll give you our picks, keys to each of the games, and whatever else is on our minds as we look forward to the weekend of football action ahead. The Dolphins, of course, host the Bills in Thursday Night Football. You can check out our preview of that game, that AFC East clash from Hard Rock Stadium, in our TNF Thursday night podcast with Noel and the new man on the Irish NFL Show, Kieran O'Donovan. So you can check that out wherever you get your podcast. Do please remember to like and subscribe on whatever platform that is, because it helps other people to find us and helps build the buzz for the Irish NFL Show community. Now to our first segment of games now, brought to you by Root Point. We're into the Sunday 6 p.m. slate with myself, Conor Brophy, Brian O'Leary, Noel Dowling and Kieran Boyle on deck today. And we start with Browns at Jaguars. Browns coming off that beatdown at the hands of the Cowboys. Jags, very unlucky and probably slightly the authors of their own misfortune in the Florida Derby, went down to the Dolphins last week, not too far away from your own backyard, Kieran. How do you see this one going?
Yeah, well, I mean, they say it's too early in week 2 for must-win games, but this is a big one for the Jags. Just listened to local sports radio last night, and they're really emphasizing the importance of this game over the Browns. Good stat: the Jags are 5 and they've lost 5 of the last 8 at home, including they've been 6 for the last 7. They've lost 6 of the last 7. So, early in the season for a must-win, but this really is a win the Jaguars have to have, and they're coming up against a Browns team that's all beat up, that's lost Njoku. And of course, the Deshaun Watson story is just swirling around the Northeast Florida area here. Will he play? What will the commissioner bring down? Did he disclose any of this stuff when he was signing the contract with the Browns? So all of this stuff is going around. But the biggest kind of storyline for me is the Jaguars, and they've got to put the foot down, and they've got to put a marker in this division, not just the division, but the conference. They've actually renamed Everbank Stadium Trevor Bank Stadium for the weekend. There's a little bit of a little Trevor Lawrence kind of Everbank kind of coexisting going on. So they've renamed the stadium for the weekend. Tyson Campbell's out for the Jags. That'll be a big blow, but the Jags have to win this game. They've got to, they've kind of coasted through the season, the last, basically the last 17, 18 games. They've got to put a foot down in this division, get a win, and move on. I like the Jags in this game. I think they're going to put a marker down, put up a lot of points. We saw with the Dallas Cowboys this vaunted defense, but without all those weapons out there for the Browns, the defense is going to be out a lot. One thing to watch, typically in September or mid-September in Jacksonville, Florida, we'll have game time in the 100 degrees, if not more. It's been very wet here the last week. I know the Jags have been practicing inside pretty much most of the week, so that's going to be a big leveler. So typically the Browns will be coming here acclimatizing to the heat, but they won't have to worry about that now. It will be wet. How wet, I'm not sure, but how that field kind of retains the water, we'll see. But there will definitely be some rain that day. And also Browns are without their starting tackles, which is going to be a big thing, just throwing that out there too. So I fully expect the Jags. I mean, this should really be over by, 10 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, 12 minutes to go. They should have a good 14-point lead. I really I like to see big scoring from the Jags this weekend.
No, the Jags are favored by 3, but will it be Trevor Bank or Never Bank this weekend?
Certainly, I agree with a lot of what Kieran said there. I think this is a big one for the Jags. We look at how last season went for them in the end, and you kind of feel they gave away that division, and then you kind of want to see how they start this season. They start really well against the Dolphins. They look like they're flying along. Then suddenly we have the Etienne, force or the fumble at the goal line, and everything just seems to change. And I think this weekend it is really, really important for them just to get off to winning ways, as Kieran mentioned. Then we look at the opposition. Look, this Browns team are going to rely on that defense a lot this season because this offense just looks a shambles. Kieran mentioned the tackles are gone, Njoku is injured, everything going on with Watson. He's just not the quarterback he was back in Houston, and that's just undeniable now. They're stuck with this millstone around their neck until they can kind of move on from him. So for me, I think the Jags will be good enough. They'll do enough to score on this defense, and I can't see how the Browns offense will do anything at all this weekend. I just think there's too many questions. There's too many issues. It just feels like there's a swarm of negativity around them that's not going to help them either. And I think the Jags will do enough to get a win at home.
Brian, Noel touched on Deshaun Watson there, as indeed did Kieran, for various different reasons. He posted a QBR last week of 9.6, which was comfortably the worst quarterback rating of any player under center last week. When you look at what Bryce Young did in a Panthers uniform, when you look at what Caleb Williams did for the Bears, not even getting to 100 yards on the day, that's saying something.
Yeah, but part of that for me is down to how comprehensive the Cowboys' defense was. We touched on it with Mike Zimmer in the transition period. Yes, they were bad and they didn't have any drives beyond 13 yards for 3 quarters, but a lot of that has to factor down to struggling offensive line last week. Cowboys getting 6 sacks. I mean, the Cowboys dominated for large parts of that game, and we have to kind of sometimes take a step back and not necessarily overreact to each game. They're going up against one of the upper echelons in terms of teams within the NFC that could potentially be in the a leading night to go to Super Bowl. So I would, as bad as it was, I also recognize they had a really strong opponent. I'm surprised by Kieran saying that this game will be over in the fourth quarter. I think this is one of the tighter games of the weekend. I do think the Jags will find a way to come out on top of it. And as well as the Browns' defense was last year, I was looking at some of the numbers in terms of their home form against their away form. Like they gave up 3,000 yards passing on the road last season compared to 19 at home, 1,000 in rushing yards on the road versus 800. So it seems as well as they play at home, that is the strong X factor for the team. The home performance on the road a little bit more difficult. And this defensive line isn't getting any younger. And with the exception of Garrett, he's the youngest. He's under 30, but the remainder are over 30, which is why I felt it was a big factor in terms of the heat. But obviously, Kieran has alluded to maybe it won't be as straightforward as that in terms of the weather conditions this week. I still think the Jags last week let that one slip. I think they'll get over the line, but I don't necessarily think it'll be one of those walk away comfortable games in the fourth quarter. I think it'll be quite tight.
Yeah, Jags are favourite by 3. I'm going that way too. I picked Jacksonville for this one. We'll put up all our picks, of course, on social media once we finish recording this evening. Chargers at Panthers is our next game. Chargers favourite by 6 points rather in this, Noel, which is pretty easy to see why for anyone who watched both teams last weekend. Panthers, Dave Canales going in there as the new coach, was the man who transformed Baker Mayfield's career in Tampa Bay last year. A lot of things expected of him in terms of how he might shape Bryce Young, but it was tough sledding week 1 against the Saints.
Absolutely. I think you'd be wondering what he let himself in for. It's just everything about the Panthers at the moment just feels like, I mentioned the Browns there, feeling there's a bit of dysfunction on offense. It just feels like this is right through the organization of the Panthers. Look, I'm not a big fan of the Saints, but you have to look at what they did this weekend. And if I just, when you look at this Panthers team, you look at Bryce Young and you wonder, is he the quarterback for an NFL team? And I think we're starting to kind of find out that he's not. We go up against, as I say, the Saints. The Saints aren't great, but they do what they need to do against this team. They put up all those points, and it just feels like this Panthers team, there's nowhere for it to go. They had so much pressure on Bryce Young. They didn't help him at all in the run game. I think they had about 58 yards. This weekend, if they're to do anything at all, they'll need to get a run game going just to try and take that pressure off them and for that offensive line just to hold together. But then you look at, obviously, the Chargers. You wonder what's going to happen with them. New head coach, they make a lot of changes. They lose a lot of players. But we knew they would implement a run game. And obviously, J.K. Dobbins comes in last week. He gets 135 yards on 10 carries. So it looks like they're starting to implement that Harbaugh plan that they want. And I just think going into this game against the Panthers, they'll be too strong for them. I worry for this Panthers team all season. I think they are the worst team in the NFL. I don't like to overreact to week 1, but week 1 was such a disastrous game for them, and it went so poorly that it really showed up all these cracks. And Dave Canales, he has his work cut out for him. There's a lot of work to be done there. I think they end up with the number 1 pick by the end of this year, and I think this weekend the Chargers comfortably beat them and cover that and more probably.
Kieran, it was every bit as advertised as far as Jim Harbaugh's regular season debut with the Chargers last week. Plenty of running and tough D.
Yeah, he must be licking his lips at this prospect this weekend. I mean, this you already know how it's going to be. It's going to be a huge amount of Dobbins and Edwards. They're going to be running up and down. The Panthers won't be able to stop. And even when the Panthers do get the ball, what can they do with it? That's like Noel said, it's a poor roster. It's been a poor roster since last year, despite adding a couple of guards. It's funny that they added guards when they needed a lot more on that team, and they spent big on positions that they needed a lot more, especially skilled positions. And Young is it's going to be another really, really long day for him. I mean, the Chargers just going to be teeing up on him all day. Now that they know what happened after the Saints game, the blueprint is there. Just rush him. He gets flustered real quick. He doesn't have the physical presence. He is I've stood very close to him. He's not an imposing player. He's about 6 foot, maybe 200 pounds. You need more than that to be a quarterback. He's softly spoken. And again, the questions and the rumors still fly around. Is he a quarterback that's built for the NFL? College is a different beast, as we know. He just doesn't seem to have that temperament or even the physicality or the volume in his voice to even carry the message that he wants to get across. It's funny, game day is going to be in South Carolina this weekend. I think there's more buzz in Columbia, South Carolina about this game, or about the college game than there is for the Panthers game. They're going to struggle to sell it out. It may be a repeat of last year, that rain game when they were selling tickets for about $2 each. Think about Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa and even Derwin James just teeing up Bryce Young. It's frightening. It's frightening for the Panthers fans. I don't see any. I mean, I think the Chargers are -6. I mean, that could go to 14 by Saturday. That's how much I think the Chargers are going to win in this game. It's gonna be a long, tough day for Panthers fans, and it's gonna be a long, tough year for Panthers fans too.
Yeah, I wish I could provide an alternative view there and give some succor to Panthers fans, but nothing that I can disagree with there. Two abiding images from either team from last week for me that I would have in my head heading into this one. From a Chargers perspective, you touched on it there a little bit, Kieran. Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, they had back-to-back sacks on Gardner Minshew at one stage. These guys look like they're very much up for it. Khalil Mack rolling back the years a little bit. Haven't really seen peak Mack for a couple of years, and I think probably Bryce Young is going to start seeing some of what Khalil Mack can do when he's at his best, because he looks lean and mean. Joey Bosa looked very much up for the fight last week. That pass rush was very effective against Gardner Minshew, and they did a good job in the secondary as well of shutting down Devontae Adams, which is just about as tough an assignment as you can manage in the National Football League. The other abiding image I have is just those errant throws from Bryce Young, one particularly horrific one over the middle where he just misses a wide open receiver by a good 5 or 6 yards. I mean, this is bread and butter for an NFL quarterback. As you say, Kieran, his diminutive status, just, those throws over the middle, which are absolutely vital in the modern NFL. You've got to be able to take what the defense is giving you, and they're just not capable of doing that with Bryce Young under center. Let's hope that Canales has some fairy dust that he can sprinkle on it to make this thing look even functional, but it's so far away from that at the moment. It's almost distressing to watch. Chargers not necessarily yet one of the elite or contending teams in the AFC, but they'll certainly have more than enough, I think, to take care of Carolina this weekend. Brian, what's your pick?
I think people have overreacted to the Chargers' victory last week. It took 3 quarters before their offense could move the ball. Obviously, the run game got it done in the end. They're in the weight class of the Panthers very much so, and for that reason, I think it'll be a comfortable Chargers victory.
All right, Saints and Cowboys next. The Saints obviously conquerors of the Panthers last week. As we were mentioning, the Cowboys put up 33 points over the vaunted Browns defense to win that one comfortably on the road in Cleveland and start their season off in style. Obviously, very much rejoicing in the fact that Dak Prescott got his deal done as well, and CeeDee Lamb newly enriched as well, making sure that all of their off-field contractual issues are sorted out. Cowboys favoured by 6 in this one. Brian, they looked very impressive last weekend. You've mentioned it a couple of times now. That Mike Zimmer defense, terrifying. 6 sacks, 17 tackles for loss. They were just knocking people down like 9 pins last weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. You would expect the form to continue in terms of how confident they were last week. They go in, they put a marker down. You would expect them to hit the ground running the opening home game. I was interested in some of the stats of the Saints offense last week. Obviously, they're playing against the Panthers and it's a struggling side. Derek Carr, 39% on play action. It was the highest percentage of all quarterbacks in the league last week, and yet the Saints were the worst in the league last year at that. But then they had their way. They didn't really have anything in front of them in terms of that Panthers defense. It's going to be a very different situation come Sunday. And I read a stat today. Derek Carr looks fantastic when he's got all the protection in the world, that he can make all the throws in the world. But as we've touched on last year, Connor, time and time again, when he's disgruntled with players because he's throwing the ball out of bounds and he's blaming the player because he's under pressure continuously. And he was for large parts of last season. It was a struggling offensive line. I think they will correct that over the course of the season. I still feel confident in my selection to still win the South. But on Sunday, going into Dallas, it's one of the hardest challenges of the year. I think the Cowboys will win this. I think they'll win this. You're talking about a game where the team will be going away in the fourth quarter, comprehensively winning. This is the one for me. Cowboys all day.
Yeah, I stupidly picked against regular season Cowboys last weekend and was left with egg in my face on that one. I'm not going to make the same mistake 2 weeks in a row. I think the Saints roll into this one, as you're kind of saying there, Brian, full of confidence. Derek Carr has 4 TD passes last weekend, but I mean, he could have done that with his eyes closed, and most quarterbacks could have done that against the way the Panthers played last weekend. I don't place a huge amount of stock in that. And what I did like to see, and I was encouraged by from a Saints perspective, is Alvin Kamara looking like he's back to something approaching his best. Very efficient running the ball and very deadly. That's something that they'll very much need to be able to get going, I think, against this Cowboys team if they're going to get any traction on offense. The Cowboys defensively just look terrifying right now, and they have all of the parts of that system working at full tilt right now. Certainly that looked to be the case last weekend. Mike Zimmer has them fired up. Micah Parsons absolutely terrifying. Trayvon Diggs, he's an interception machine last season, picked up where he left off. Literally, no pun intended, picked up where he left off. As 6-point favorites, I think that probably is just about right for me. I don't think the Saints will be rolled over. I think they'll be competitive on both sides of the ball. Defensively, they look good last weekend. Again, their stars showed up. Marshawn Lattimore in particular had a very good game. And I don't think they'll be steamrolled, despite the fact that Arlington can be an intimidating place to play. But I don't think there's any chance of an upset here either. No.
Yeah, I think this is, to be honest, going to be a good test now of the Saints. As you say, we see what they did last weekend, and it is what it is against the Panthers. They went out and they did a job, and that's all you can do is beat the teams in front of you. But I think this Dallas challenge is just going to be a tough one for them. This Saints offense, our offensive line, is not good at all. We saw what the Zimmer defense did last weekend against an offensive line that wasn't good. They can absolutely capitalize on that and put quarterbacks under pressure. And as we mentioned, Derek Carr doesn't like being under pressure. So that's something that we could really look out for. They're really going to have to step up and make sure they protect them, because for me, I think this actually could get a bit ugly. Then we look at the Cowboys offense. I mean, look, it wasn't amazing last week. It did what it needed to do against a very good offense. It wore them down, and it didn't put up spectacular numbers, but it did a job. There's obviously a lot of they're very buoyant there now with their new contract signed. CeeDee Lamb is signed. Dak Prescott is signed. Things just kind of feel a little more positive with the Cowboys now, as during off season it kind of felt like, oh, why haven't they done this? Why haven't they done that? Maybe we're kind of seeing now that they were happy enough with the core of what they had there, and they are the regular season champs most years. So I think the Cowboys win this one, and I think they win by a decent chunk.
Before we go to Jets Titans, your pick, Kieran.
How about them Cowboys?
That'll do it nicely. And you're on deck for their first take on Jets Titans as well. We have the Jets traveling to Tennessee. Kieran, the Jets talked up, and I know you weren't having any of it, as potential contenders this season. And we saw just how far away they might be in the way they were handled by the 49ers on Monday night. The Titans, very frisky on defense, look like they'll cause teams problems this year. But the Will Levis question still persists.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything there. Frisky on defense, a lot of overreaction to the Jets, and I actually have the Titans winning this one. I think that Jets are going into Nashville. Cast our mind back to last week with Will Levis. That kid, they were up a nice little chunk. I think it was 17-0 up against the Bears, and it was special teams and defense that got the win for the Bears. We see what Levis did, and he's not obviously going to do that again. He's going to shoot out if he tries anything like that again. I see a lot of Tony Pollard. Look at what the run game for San Francisco did against this Jets run defense. I mean, they're littered with big names on defense, but you got a no name. Not, I don't want to call him a backup or anything like that, but Mason ran right through that Jets defense. He ran up and down at will. And that left the pass game with a nice little kind of opening for the Niners. Rodgers, again, all the talk about him, I've listened to a lot of New York radio this week, and some people are high on it and some people are like, well, pump the brakes. It's only one game and he hasn't really had any time to play with these guys. He's never really thrown to Garrett Wilson. He doesn't play in the preseason. So I if the Jets had won in week one, I would call this a potential banana skin, but they're 0-1 already. And think about the other game that's on tonight. You got Bills Dolphins. The winner of that is going to be 2-0. If the Jets lose on Sunday, they're going to be 0-2, and they're already in the hole in that division. So this is, again, don't want to call it a must win, but if the Jets don't win on Sunday, the alarm bells will be ringing like crazy. And Rodgers is already telling people, if you're not going to be on the bandwagon, don't jump on the bandwagon by week 10 when we're flying away with the division. So I think it's going to be really hard for the Jets this weekend. And I actually like the Titans for a victory. I think it's going to be Tony Pollard heavy. And you think about the secondary for the Titans who played last week, L'Jarius Sneed and Quandre Diggs. Rodgers will be throwing the ball a lot. I can see a couple of picks coming their way. So it's going to be a narrow win, but I can see the Titans squeezing this out by a field goal.
Home opener for the Titans, Brian, in Nashville, a team that got the Brian O'Leary seal of approval in the offseason. You were very much looking forward to what they might do, and they're a team that you expect to go far. They should have probably, to be fair, opened the season with a win and be looking to back it up this weekend. Will they get it back on track against the Jets?
No, not for me. And it's a bit strange because bearing in mind how high I was on Will Levis and the Titans to go to playoffs, I still think, look, it's a long season. The NFL teams can turn around, but as bad as, I wouldn't say as bad as the comprehensive loss for the Jets on Monday. I mean, by and large, most teams going into Santa Clara, even McCaffrey or no McCaffrey, are going to come out on the wrong end of a result. I thought there was some bright spots in the game, and Rodgers' connection with Wilson at the time, Lazar gets 2 touchdowns. I thought Rodgers settled into the game as it went on. I thought he started to look his old self. Obviously, we saw the touchdown, and he's one of the best at mastering the free play. Where there's a flag, he'll find an opportunity to get down the field. And defensively, they weren't there. They struggled, and the skill set of some of the 49ers guys, like I was reading and looking at some of the analysis of the game around how they spread out and they allowed Mason to run through the gap in terms of and essentially kill the safeties, and that's what he did all day. I don't think they're going to have that stellar team to put this up against on Sunday. I think Sauce Gardner might have a rebound game. He struggled. He was taken out of the game. There was questions whether he was injured. They got to get this one. And even you're looking ahead to schedule the next Thursday against the Patriots. They play the Broncos the following week. Then they go to London. Realistically, they got to be going to London 3-1 because Kieran has already referred to tonight, and there's bigger games to come for the Bills and Dolphins. They got to get Sunday over the line. I don't think it'll be pretty, but I do think they'll find a way to get their first win of the season.
Yeah, I don't think it was crazy by any means to pick the Titans in this game. I can't quite get there myself, though, albeit that I saw a lot of things from them defensively against the Bears that I thought were better than I expected to be. And it's not like they had nothing going into the season. I really liked the way they got after the quarterback. I don't know how much to put that down on a very porous Bears O-line, though. At the same time, there's always that moment or seed of doubt in your head in week 1 that you're overreacting to something. But I think there's been an overreaction to the way the Jets were beaten by the Niners, beaten by one of the best teams in the NFL, a team that might well end up on top of the pile this year. Yeah, the fact that they were able to run through that Jets defense does concern me greatly. But I did see a couple of things that I really liked from the Jets on offense. As far as I can see, Aaron Rodgers was a little bit rusty, but he's still got it. I mean, he's able to make beautiful throws. He hit a couple of absolute dimes on Monday night, and I expect him to pick it up. I expect the Jets defense to kick it up a level. I think they'll just have a little bit too much for Tennessee, and I expect them to come out of there with a win, which they absolutely need to have, as you both said, because they can't afford to fall into a hole in the AFC East behind whoever picks up the win in the Thursday night game between the Bills and the Dolphins. No.
Jets for me.
All right, we move on to Seahawks, Pats, and before we get into that, Brian, I'm laughing at poor Rory's comment, and I'm sure he was representative of how a lot of people feel after week 1. He said, "Good evening, gents. We're all on week 2. The Bengals did me dirty last week, my first ever NFL last man standing, and I exit stage left after week 1, or survivor as they call it in the States. The Bengals literally broke last man standing last weekend. Everyone expected them to turn over the Patriots. So either the Patriots did you dirty or the Bengals did you dirty, but everyone who backed Cincinnati ended up exiting stage left, Rory. I think you're in good company there. The conquerors of Cincinnati, of course, were New England. They host the Seahawks this weekend. Seahawks favored by 3. Can the Pats keep on the upset train, or do the Seahawks go to 2-0?
Before we get into that, Connor, I run a last man standing, 84 entries last weekend, 37 remaining by Tuesday morning, and not necessarily everybody on the Bengals. So it is picking against the spread. It's a little bit more difficult than just selecting a winner. In this game, I think we all have to be pleasantly surprised about the Patriots last week. It was like you're looking for a good feeling to start a season, and you're looking for a storyline. You're looking for a team that's been galvanized by a new head coach. Bearing in mind the enormity of the task in which he had taken over from Bill Belichick. Whatever way the manner of how Bill Belichick ended his career in New England, we still have to reflect on all the Super Bowls, all the great seasons, the victorious endings, and the pressure that comes with going in there.
And the fact, Brian, that he left them with a wildly underrated defense. Like, you're able to take your best pass rusher out there, and they absolutely locked it down.
Yeah, absolutely. The front seven literally controlled the line of scrimmage throughout the course of the game. I thought Burrow, and I know we're going to get into the Chiefs Bengals preview later on, I thought Burrow didn't look healthy, didn't look right, he didn't look 100% back. And you've obviously got the scenario in there with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and everything that came with that. And I think the Patriots exploited it. And for me, having watched large parts of the Seahawks game against the Broncos, obviously we have a vested interest because our former colleague and Colin is a big Broncos fan. With the exception of the third quarter where Walker ran for 81 yards of his 103 on the day, the Seahawks didn't do a lot for most of the game offensively, and I can see a scenario where they struggle on Sunday. I'm leaning Patriots. I'm going to go with the shock. I'm going to buy into another week of Patriots. I think it could come crumbling down next Thursday night when they play against the Jets in MetLife. But for me, I think this is a nice start to the season, a nice home game to kick off, and I think the Patriots run the ball well effectively with Stevenson and they get over the line.
A brave pick from Brian there, Kieran. Are you willing to get on board the New England train?
Well, we all agree that was a great performance last week. But what stood out for me is they ran the ball 36 times for 170 yards, and that's going to be a huge factor this weekend. The wide receivers didn't really happen for the Patriots. Not a huge amount of spreading the ball out. Demario Douglas and Jalen Polk is probably about it that they have out wide, but they're going to run it a lot again. My big thing is, where was DK Metcalf last week with the Seahawks? What happened to him? And you got to remember the Seahawks it's a 1 o'clock game, which is effectively 10 o'clock in the morning for them. They've got to fly the entire length of the country and play this game. I think the Seahawks have enough, though. I think the kind of shine will come off the Patriots from week one. I think that we're going to be very competitive. It's going to be a very close game. But Seahawks, they've got to stop the run of the Patriots, and they've got to be able to get Metcalf involved in the game, because we saw what Kenneth Walker was able to do. It's going to be a close game. Patriots, now they got something to root for. Brissett, we all thought that Drake May might have been coming in a little earlier, but might have to pump the brakes on that after Brissett's performance last week. So he bought himself another couple of weeks probably. And that'll be a real fun game to watch, because everyone wants to see, is this Patriots team, how long are they able to kind of extend this run or extend this kind of feel good feeling? Everyone always sees a team or two come out every year that nobody expected. So will the Patriots be that team? I don't know, because they're very light on offense. But like I said, that defense, you have a strong defense, a strong front four, or even front seven, and you can do a lot of good things in this league. Saying that, I do think the Seahawks have enough in reserve, despite the fact that they've got to travel, almost 3,000 miles and play at 10 a.m. for them. But I like the Seahawks by a touchdown.
No, the pattern for the Patriots last weekend was Ramondre Stevenson running wild, and that secondary managing to blanket the vaunted Bengals wide receiver room. Seahawks have a pretty impressive group in the skill positions themselves. Can the Pats repeat the trick, or do the Seahawks get it done?
I don't think they will this weekend, the Pats. I think, look, it was a great result last week. You mentioned Stevenson, what a great game. I mean, the boys mentioned the Pats defense, and I think that defense will keep them in a lot of games, throughout the season. I just don't have the confidence in that offense. Stevenson will run the ball, but, at some point that's just not going to be enough. And I think this Seahawks team just has a little bit too much for this Patriots team. I mean, look, we mentioned the weapons. For me, Geno Smith is the key. I mean, he's very hot and cold at times. I think they need Geno Smith to step up. I see Kenneth Walker is on the injury report. I don't know if he's trending to play or not. He probably is, but obviously he's a really good player when he gets going. And then you mentioned DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett there. And I just think the Seahawks team will be better this weekend. And I think if everything clicks for them, they probably just have a little bit too much for this Pats team.
It's Seattle for me as well. Before we move on to Colts Packers, a wild shift in betting on this one as Jordan Love limped off the field in Sao Paulo towards the end of Green Bay's defeat to the Eagles in their season opener. Packers had been favoured in this one, but with Malik Willis filling in at quarterback for Green Bay, lurched the other way. Colts now favoured going in to Lambeau to win this one. All things being equal, I would tend to have thought that the Packers would be seeing this one as a bounce-back game. their team that a lot of us have fancied to go well this season, pick up where they left off last season. They wouldn't have expected to be 0-2, but I think they're going to head in that direction. I think Colts gave the Texans more than a run for their money last weekend. You give me that Texans team versus the Packers with Malik Willis, and for me, the Texans are the better team. And I think the Colts are going to come out of this one, maybe leaving Green Bay with egg on their faces in Lambeau. I'm not so sure what Matt LaFleur is going to cook up as a game plan to get the best out of Malik Willis. Obviously, a very athletic quarterback, but tends to be quite an errant passer. I don't think that's going to go well against this Colts team. Colts got a lot of pressure on CJ Stroud last weekend, managed to sack him 4 times. That Colts defensive front is one of the better ones you're going to see in the league. Anthony Richardson, as we saw, has an unbelievable arm. Now, I don't think sending 63.5-yard passes down the field to Alex Pierce, the longest air yards on any pass since Next Gen Stats started analyzing that particular statistic last weekend. After falling, it should be said as well, just hops back up, doesn't even have his feet set, and is able to seemingly effortlessly bomb the ball down the field. Unbelievable score, and probably one of the better ones we're going to see this year, but that's not a sustainable path to success. It is very important, though, that he can stretch the field and keep that Packers secondary honest. And I do think that they're going to have just enough to come out of Green Bay with the win. No.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you there. I mean, the big thing here, you mentioned Matt LaFleur, and what can he do with a backup quarterback and Malik Willis coming in? Can he help him out? Can he scheme something? That's going to be so important. I think we've talked a lot about this, the receiving core for the Packers, how young they are, even into tight ends there as well. They're very young. And I think in a situation like this, you would hope for maybe some more experienced heads to kind of get over losing your starting quarterback like this, which they don't have. And I think that may count against them. They obviously are going to need Josh Jacobs to really try and rack up some yards. But I think this Colts team will be strong enough to go in there and to just exploit the situation of the starting quarterback missing. I think you mentioned Anthony Richardson. It's going to be interesting to see what we get out of him, because that arm is just crazy looking, but he can be a bit inconsistent as well. So, can he have enough just to guide this team? And then Taylor running the ball, I think, will cause a lot of trouble for the Packers. But again, I just think the loss of the starting quarterback is going to be too much to overcome, and I think the Colts will take a squeaker.
Do you see it any differently, Kieran, or is the Malik Willis effect going to negatively impact Green Bay ultimately?
Yeah, I don't think anyone can agree that it's a positive for the Packers. An unproven player in the last couple of years. He's been your perennial backup. Hasn't shown or hasn't done much to instill confidence in this Packers offense. But again, the Colts can't believe how lucky they got in this and to back up into Lambeau with a backup quarterback at this time of year. They fully expected to be going up against Love, but I just think that it's going to have to be a game where the Colts just ground and pound. We saw Friday night not even the field conditions, but what the Eagles were able to do to that Packers secondary, and I've spoken about it a lot in the last couple of weeks. I'm not sold on that Packers secondary. That's the weak spot in that team. But Richardson was 9 of 19 last weekend, 212, but he also rushed for 57. I'm still concerned about him running the ball. And I think
he puts his head into tackles, and he's going to get his bell rung very quickly.
I think a lot of people are concerned about. I've been talking about my concerns about him running the ball a lot, but the concussions. You're one big hit away from being out for an indefinite amount of time. And I think he is, like you said earlier, he's always ready with a highlight reel, but that's not what the NFL is about. It's about grounding out yards and about keeping the ball. Moving them chains, and it's going to be a game the Colts will win purely because Love is out and Willis is not going to be enough for them to get over the line. But Taylor's going to have to run, kind of pretty much how Saquon ran through that Packers defense last week, and that's kind of the template for me. They've already seen what he can do, or what Saquon did last week, and it's just going to be a lot of ground and pound. Nice weather, so. Won't be underfoot conditions like there were in Sao Paulo. So probably by 7, I think the Colts take this one.
Brian?
That's why you can never legislate for injuries or make way too early selections, because you just don't know what's around the corner. Colts for me they fell into a good spot here, Colts.
And that brings us to the end of our first segment. We'll take a quick break before we get into 49ers Vikings. All right, you're back with the Irish NFL show, and our second segment of Week 2 picks. That break was brought to you by Buskers on the Ball, who are the sponsors of our second segment. Incidentally, there's a 49ers Irish Faithful watch party in Buskers on the Ball this Sunday. So where better to start segment 2 than with the 49ers, those self-same Niners going into battle against the Vikings this weekend. The Vikings host them in Minnesota. 49ers favoured by 5. Sam Darnold looked awful good last weekend against the Giants. Sorry, Brian and Kieran, to bring up painful old memories. Turns out Kevin O'Connell can get some extra juice out of Sam Darnold, but I think that's probably a lot more to do with the way the Giants played and maybe the lackluster effort of the Giants defense. And it's necessarily that Sam Darnold is about to make a massive redemption arc here. I don't think he's going to get any sort of change out of that 49ers defense that managed to keep Aaron Rodgers under 170 yards at the weekend, picked him off. Diamador Lenore and Charvarius Ward in particular in that secondary looking lethal. Joey Bosa and fellow pass rushers looking pretty lethal for the 49ers as well. Not to mention that Jordan Mason just ran wild for the 49ers. If Christian McCaffrey's understudy can do that to you, it's pretty scary stuff, considering that we had kind of widely assumed that the 49ers to have the best starting 11 on offense in the NFL. It looks like Kyle Shanahan has now figured out, excuse me, how to unleash the backups in the right spots as well. They look to me to be very much the 49ers team we'd expected to start the season. I think that's going to be way too much in Minnesota. I think 5 points is probably slightly generous to the Vikings. Kieran.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could all agree that the Niners are probably going to win this game, probably by 7 or more. The interesting thing is one of the biggest discussion points and talking points is Sam Darnold back. See, what the Giants do is they rehab quarterbacks and they essentially welcome into the fold and they give them that shot of confidence. They did it last year with Zach Wilson in the regular season game, and they've in the space of a week they've turned Sam Darnold into a offensive comeback player of the year. It's bizarre, I mean, he went 12 for 12.
Do you have the Giants cast as the rebound relationship, that nice boy or girl that you need to be just after you've had a tough breakup?
He had 12 consecutive passes. I mean, he went 19 to 24. He did what he wanted out there. And a lot of that is due to the Vikings O-line. Christian Darrisaw is an absolute legend that not enough people know about. But this is where the Vikings come crashing back down to earth. They're going to get manhandled by that same team that did what they did to the Jets and made the Jets look very ordinary in all reality. A lot of trumpets went in with the Jets, but they humbled them pretty quick. We all know about the weapons that the Niners have. We all know their strengths. That defense with Fred Warner and Hufanga's back 100% now. He's another star. I think the biggest matchup for me is going to be that O-line for the Vikings up against Bosa and Leonard Floyd and Malik Collins. Just those crashing bodies in there in the trenches. And that's where that's going to be a big battle in the first half. It's inevitable that if the 49ers will impose their will in this game. They've just got too much out there. And, that's even after the Vikings had that nice little confidence and ego boost last week. But the Niners will just impose the will, and they'll end up winning by probably 10 points.
All right, Noel, how's it going to go for you?
Yeah, look, I was very impressed with the Vikings last week. Obviously, you take it in that they're playing the Giants. For me, they've obviously got some great players there. Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones can really cause teams problems. With the 49ers, obviously on a short week and traveling to Minnesota, maybe that could help. But in the long run, probably, I think the 49ers are probably just too strong. You mentioned, you lose McCaffrey and your backup can still come in and run for 147 yards. This is the kind of quality that the 49ers have right through that roster. And I think this Minnesota team, well, they have players that can hurt you. They have weapons that can score. I just think this 49ers team can score that bit more. And I do worry about Sam Darnold. He looked really good last weekend, but I don't envisage that's how he's going to look week on week when he's playing. I think at some point we're going to see the real Sam Darnold trying to come back. Kieran mentions the O-line that will obviously be able to do a good job to protect him, but I think as a quarterback, we've seen him in a number of stops now. We kind of know who he is. And I think it's very hard for a team, even with those good playmakers, to build a foundation on Sam Darnold as quarterback. So I think the 49ers go in, and I think they're just too strong.
Brian, your pick before we move on.
They got beaten Minnesota on Monday Night Football last season. They won't make the same mistake again. 49ers for me.
Okay, we roll on to Raiders at Ravens. Raiders heading into Baltimore as 8-point underdogs. Ravens favoured by 8 there, if you prefer looking at it that way. Noel, Gardner Minshew at quarterback for the Raiders didn't necessarily have a terrible game against the Chargers, but he came under a lot of pressure, and you don't necessarily see this being any easier an assignment.
No, I mean, if he's look, obviously we've talked about the Chargers and the good players they have back there, but this Ravens team are another team that are built on defense that could really put them under pressure. I don't think this Raiders team looked very good. I thought they'd look better, to be honest. I know it's opening day and maybe things change, but again, similar to kind of Sam Darnold, I don't know how much you want to be really building your team on Gardner Minshew, and we're going to see how that kind of goes. This Raiders team, I think, has a couple of players again that can hurt you, but it's just not right. And then we look at this Ravens team, whom I'm expecting a lot more from. Lamar Jackson, he's had an extra few days rest, so they'll be ready coming in. Derrick Henry, I think, is someone who will get better and better. And I think between the two of them, they have more than enough to really put this Raiders team under pressure. Then you'll bring in Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, who had such a game there against the Chiefs and was a toenail away from winning that game, is another option they have. And again, I think this Ravens team going into this match against the Raiders are too strong, and I expect them to take that win.
Brian, as Noel mentioned, Isaiah Likely probably be picking shoes that are half size smaller this weekend just in case. But the Raiders face a big task going in there up against him and his mates.
Yeah, it's strange in a way how I know Mark Andrews had that serious injury last season. I suppose Likely took over as the leading tight end, and I suppose they haven't really moved away from him. If you look at the numbers from Mark Andrews last week, there was some plays. He was hardly involved in the game. Like Likely has just stepped up so much, and he obviously has the big touchdown. There's the one at the end, which unfortunately is ruled out. The Ravens last week for me kind of let that one slip. It felt like the game last year where the Lions went in and got over the line and beat the Chiefs, and I felt the Chiefs, as good as they were, and some explosive plays from their new wide receiver, I thought the Ravens, for large parts of that game, should have really put it away. And they kind of got away from what was working very early and effectively, which was Derrick Henry. One of the leading players in which they bring in free agency. Slightly underrated. I spoke to Brian Wacker from the Baltimore Sun a few weeks ago. He couldn't get over the fact that people were kind of downplaying this free agency pickup and what they really needed, because they've been a running back by committee team for so long. For Sunday, I think we're going to see Derrick Henry, and then a bit of Lamar Jackson, because I think the Raiders will be torn asunder by who they look to focus on. And if they're going to focus on Derrick Henry, then Lamar is going to take off, and then obviously you bring in the other parts of the game where they're scheming with other players. I think this is one of the difficult days. I think I referred to a rocking chair game last week with an AFC North team, and I thought it'd be the Bengals. I think this week truly is the one. I think the Ravens, I think this could be the most comprehensive victory of the weekend.
Yeah, I think, Brian, you identified the key to it there. The Chargers were able to run all over the Raiders at the weekend. The Raiders didn't necessarily do a terrible job in the passing game. I mean, Justin Herbert was held to a reasonable total. Nobody really stood out. Lad McConkey had a couple of nice catches, but there was nobody who looked like they were about to go off against the Raiders last weekend. Nonetheless, they lose that game because they really just couldn't contain the run, and the Chargers defense really stepped up and had Gardner Minshew under duress. As we said at the start, the Ravens aren't going to be any less formidable. In fact, they're going to give Gardner and his friends on the O-line plenty of it this weekend. I think that's a pretty tough prospect for them to have to overcome. I think they're going to struggle to contain the run. I'm not necessarily sold on how well Derrick Henry is going to go. He was held under 4 yards a carry. I think he 3 point something a carry last weekend. I know he punched in a score, and he obviously is a huge red zone threat. I wonder how capable of the sort of workload that you'd like to see the Ravens give him that he's actually capable of at this point in his career. They talked him up in preseason, how lean he was looking, how mean he was looking. It's week 1, so we're only heading into week 2 now, so I'm certainly not going to write him off. But we'll see whether he turns out to be the missing piece for the Ravens. Much more impressed, obviously, by the way that they've been able to. Isaiah Likely now looks like Lamar Jackson's favorite target. Didn't even need to do much with Zay Flowers, but he still remains a threat. Mark Andrews, as you mentioned, is almost a forgotten man. He's not exactly a bad piece to have. And Rashard Bateman, obviously, is a pretty nice option for the Ravens to have too. They've just got so much that they can come at the Raiders with. This is going to be a tough trip from Vegas, and I think they're going to be going home nursing their second loss of the season. Kieran.
Purple rain, Purple rain. Give me the Ravens big.
All right. We have Giants at Commanders next. Commanders favourite by just 2 in this one. If you look at the recent history of this fixture, this is, Kieran, you said the Giants were the kind of rebound relationship for other team. The Commanders are the comfort blanket that the Giants come home to when they've had a bad one the week before. This is probably the perfect time for them to roll in there. If Daniel Jones can actually remember how to play quarterback, and if the Giants defense does what we were expecting them to do from week 1 and gets back on script, we thought that would be the strength of this team, and that would be something that DJ could lean on. That didn't certainly look to be the case last weekend. And from a Commander's perspective, we saw a lot of what Jaden Daniels can do with his legs. Haven't yet seen a huge amount of what he might be able to do with his arms. I don't think any receiver there got over 20 yards in that previous game last weekend. So that's still an open question there in terms of his development as a quarterback. I still think, though, that the Giants are going to come out here with the upset. I think they're going to get their season, at least for now, back on track. I think it's a New York win. It's just one of those divisional games that seems to be one-way traffic, and I don't see the traffic lights changing this weekend. Kieran?
Yeah, ordinarily I would be positive and optimistic about the Giants playing Washington. However, I'm just filled with, nothing but gloom and despondency about this team right now. There's very little for me to get positive or excited about in any way with this team. I actually think the Commanders are gonna win this game. I think they're trending in a different direction of the Giants. Everybody saw the dynamic plays that Daniels was doing last week. He had a really nice game, despite the fact there wasn't really a cutting edge to it, and that's more to do with the kind of limitations, the weapons that he has. You got an older Austin Eckler, and Terry McLaurin is probably on the down part of his career, but they still have Brian Robinson, and they still have enough weapons out there to cause problems to the Giants. This is as bad as it can be for the Giants, and this is the first time that I've ever been down on Dable. I just think that there's, from the Hard Knocks show in the summer to all the stuff and all the noise coming out of East Rutherford, everything was pointing in a good direction with Brian Burns, getting the offense going with Malik Neighbors. I can't see any situation right now. I think Jones is absolutely devoid of any confidence. There's just negativity filling his head, whether it be picks or fumbles or whatever it is. What's disappointing for me is the it's not been the offensive line, which was that was the thing that Giants fans, hung their hat on and saying, well, if Jones had a good O-line, he might be able to play. The O-line played great on Sunday, and it's much improved. Illuminor from the Raiders, and they've got Carmen Brasillo, who worked magic with the Raiders O-line and turned them into a top 10 last year. So it's not the typical traditional problems that every Giants fan thought it was. And what was really disappointing was the defense yet again. Other than Dexter Lawrence, who always shows up, Kayvon Thibodeau again is flattering to deceive, and he's one of these Flash Charlies or Instagram superheroes, and then when it comes to 1 o'clock or 4 o'clock on a Sunday, he goes missing. The big thing that really concerns me with the Giants going forward is this 2022 draft class was Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibodeau, and neither of them have come anywhere close to being 5 and 7 respectively in the draft in performance wise. The secondary is shaky too, despite the fact that Andrew Phillips and Tyler Nubin had good games. But other than that, there's not a lot to get excited about as Giants fans. We all saw the footage of them leaving in the third quarter. You spend 7-8 months, getting motivated and getting enthusiastic about a nice season, and then they go out and lay an egg like this, like they did just like last year against the Cowboys. I'm hoping things turn around, but I can't see it happening this week. Normally, like I said, I would be optimistic about a Giants win, but I think the Commanders are too much. It's at home. I think that the Commanders are going to bring that positive momentum they had from last week, where despite the loss, they were able to do a lot of things on offense. New kicker for the Commanders, but I think it's going to be low. That's the other thing. It's going to be a low-scoring game. This could be a 15-12, 12-9 kind of game, but I still like the Commanders, as much as it pains me to say it.
I was going to say, Kieran, if you're relying on the Commanders kicker to kick them to victory, I think that might be the greatest hope that the Giants have based on how Cade York did last weekend. Brian, please tell me that the 2 Giants fans on the show are not both going to go against New York.
There's one game gone in the season. Like Kieran's talking like we're we're 0-8 and the season's completely collapsed and we're already looking ahead to draft selections. The Commanders gave up over 400 yards of offense last weekend. Their secondary was absolutely annihilated. And I appreciate the Bucs have really good players, and Godwin and Evans in their own right on their day are up there in terms of great wide receivers in the league. But they gave up 400 total offense. Forbes, their main cornerback, has now gone out injured. He's gone for effectively the next 4 to 6 weeks. Their offensive line last week was a shambles. We're saying about Jaden Daniels having a good game. Like, I'm very high in Jaden Daniels, don't get me wrong. And I'd love for him to be wearing the Giants blue on Sunday as their quarterback. And I think there's a great career ahead of him. But he was chaotic last weekend because he had nobody to throw to. And he didn't even have the patience because he knew his offensive line was struggling so bad to take the force read and the secondary. He ran 16 times for 84 yards. He had his helmet knocked off twice in the game. That doesn't bode well. That's RG3 type stuff for me, where you're going to eventually find yourself getting knocked out, i.e. Anthony Richardson after 4 weeks of last season. He needs to control that. And I think the Giants defense are in for a big game on Sunday. I think there's a redemption game for the likes of Burns and Thibodeau. And I think Daniel Jones will probably come out and have a serviceable game. But I think ultimately the Giants defense will get them over the line on Sunday. I think the Giants will go in there and win. And I think they'll win comfortably.
All right, Noel, your pick.
Commanders.
All right, we move on to Bucs at Lions. And Lions favoured by 7 in this one, which from one perspective might be a little bit generous, Noel. I wonder, do you see it that way, given how well the Bucs played, admittedly, against the Commanders last weekend, and a vintage Baker Mayfield game, maybe the best Baker Mayfield's ever played, nearly 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, 140 passer rating?
Yeah, what a great day by Baker Mayfield. And look, Brian touched on it. They had 400 yards in total offense, which, when you have players that they have in there, in Godwin and Mike Evans, obviously is something you need to be kind of doing with those players. But I think they get brought back down a bit with the Lions this weekend. I think the Lions had a tough game there against the Rams last week. They were slow and patchy at times, but they still have that quality in there. And even when things weren't working right, you have Jameson Williams was stepping up and doing what he does. But I think this Lions team overall is just really too strong for the Bucs team. And I think they'll go into this game with a lot of confidence. And I think they probably should be too strong. I think one area that the Lions could be good at, we look at last year, obviously the secondary and the cornerbacks was an issue that they really had. And they did go out and address that. But obviously their number one pick in the draft, Terry and Arnold, got picked on quite a bit there at the weekend, gave away a few penalties, and maybe Godwin and Evans are players you could look to exploit that. But I think all in all, you know, they have Amon-Ra St. Brown, the David Montgomery, you know, they're just too strong, I think, this Lions team, and I think they will end up probably running out winners, and I think they could cover that 7-10 kind of point gap because they're just kind of that much stronger than the Bucs.
Kieran, the quirk of the schedule this year is that the Lions play 2 of the teams that they played in the playoffs last year in the opening 2 games. They took care of business against the Rams, so that went according to plan. And they now play the Bucs, who they had also played in the playoffs last year. They won that one. Will they win this one?
Yeah, nice little rematch of the division series, the division game from last year. I still like the Lions at home. I mean, when you put it down to a pure talent perspective, you know, look what the Lions have: talent across the field. Bucs, what's their big question mark against the secondary? You know, that's really what it's going to come down to. I like a high scoring game. I think it's going to be back and forth, despite the fact that, you know, the Lions defense is really strong. I just like, I think Baker is going to just, you know, build on last week and get that confidence. He was really good last week. It's good to see Baker. It's good to see a player like that who was, you know, not downtrodden, but kind of discarded almost by the league. And he's kind of pulled himself back up and reestablished himself as a good quarterback, a really good quarterback, and got that nice contract. And he's made the Buccaneers, you know, relevant again after the Brady years. So, you know, kudos to him. But I think when it comes down to it, the Lions are just stacked. We talk about the 49ers all the time being loaded everywhere, but the Lions are not far behind them in the talent department. And you know, they got the law firm of Gibbs and Montgomery just running the ball. You know, they're good on a good day. They're a shout for 100 yards each, and, you know, 1 or 2 touchdowns each. That's how good they are. That's how potent they are in this offense. You know, I see a pretty close game in the third quarter into the fourth, but I think the Lions, they just have too much talent, too much skill to keep it close. I think they're going to win by 10.
Yeah, I did really enjoy watching Tampa Bay last weekend, admittedly, you know, against inferior opposition. But one of the, you know, I'm a massive fan of Mike Evans. I mean, there's one particular catch he makes last weekend where Pierre St. Just, the Commanders cornerback is all over him. Like he absolutely has perfect coverage. Couldn't have played it any better. Evans, I think it was Greg Olson in the commentary with the vintage, the late hands, just as able to get that ball out of nowhere. It looked like he managed to smuggle it out of the air. He's just a superb receiver to watch. And I do think it's interesting, as you mentioned, Noel, to see what they'll do against that line secondary, which still isn't perfect. I think Terrion Arnold is the right man going into the right situation at the right time, but it's inevitable as a rookie corner that if you're perceived as the weak link, you're going to be picked on. So I expect the Bucs to go after him early and often, and we'll see how that one works out for them. But at the same time, you're going to have Aiden Hutchinson, you're going to have Anzalone teeing off, and they're going to be coming hunting Baker, and I think they're going to have some success at the weekend. I think he is going to be under pressure, and we should see a slightly different version of Baker than we saw the cool, calm, collected gunslinger against the Commanders last weekend. That was a big time win for the Lions against the Rams. They come out first game, massive expectation. You're playing a genuine contender. I mean, the Rams are a classy outfit, and I don't think they're going away this season. Lions took care of business there. I think they'll take care of business here too. Brian.
Lions comprehensive victory.
Right, that brings us to the end of the second segment. We now go to our final segment of game picks, brought to you by our partner QuinnBet. We're moving into the 9 p.m. window now and the later games, where we have starting the Bengals here against the Chiefs. The Bengals heading into what they used to call Burrowhead. I'm not quite so sure there is confidence in their ability to pull out a win in Kansas City as they have been in the past, particularly after dropping that very unexpected loss against the Patriots in their opening game. Chiefs are favored by 5 in this one. Brian, you touched on it a little bit earlier when we were talking about the Ravens, that we came out of that game talking up the Chiefs, and we came up talking about how, wow, they've managed to win the Super Bowl in a down year. Now it looks like they've added a little bit of extra talent. It looks like Xavier Worthy is exactly the player who came as advertised, the speedster who could take the top off a defense. We saw him in the run game as well, and 4.21 40 speed hits different. You hand the guy out like that a ball in the backfield, on one of those nice designed Andy Reid running plays, and you have no margin for error. Like, nobody was able to lay a glove on him once he picked up a head of steam. There's a busted coverage on the touchdown he got in the passing game. Marlon Humphrey, I think, handed him off thinking he had support, and he didn't, and he ends up going to the house on that one. But all of that said, the Chiefs should have lost that game. The Ravens should have beaten them, and I think the Bengals probably will have a little bit of hope going into Arrowhead. Kieran, you mentioned it last week. Bengals tend to start the season slowly. They tend to take bad losses in September. That was a particularly bad one against New England. This is not an easy place to go and look to bounce back. I do expect a much better version of Cincinnati this weekend, and I think this might be closer than the 5 points that the bookies have it. I think it didn't help the disruption. The Bengals haven't done themselves any favors, and their GM and ownership really didn't play the offseason very well. They let things hang over them too long. Should have taken care of business. Not good to have Jamar Chase going into the season as a question mark. T. Higgins is pissed off playing in the situation that he's playing in as well. That's just not smart. It's not good business for a team that has ambitions of winning a Super Bowl and really should have the players to do it. But ultimately, I believe in their coaching. I believe in their talent. I believe we'll see a much better version of the Bengals over the course of the season than we saw last weekend. I think that starts here today. I do not think, however, that it starts off necessarily with a win. I think the Chiefs are good enough to win it. Kieran.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised at the line. I know it's at home. I'm a little surprised the Chiefs are that much of a favorite. 4 of the 5 meetings have been decided by a field goal in recent times. And we've already talked about how Cincinnati has a slow start and has a rough September. They're 1-10 in the first 2 weeks of the season under Taylor. Very slow starters, but that's if you're going to get off to a bad start early in the season in September, that's the time to do it and start building momentum. But the thing for me is Burrow is 3-1 against the Chiefs. He's got the number. He's the only quarterback. He's the only one that can hold him to account in this league and can actually put it up to them. He's averaged nearly 300 yards in his games against the Chiefs for 9 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, whereas Mahomes has averaged about 250 and 8 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. This is the game that I think Burrow is going to, cast aside last week and put that down as a fluke. I know the numbers aren't great for Cincinnati in September, but iron sharpens iron, and I think going into Arrowhead at a 4:00 game, America's game of the week, it's going to be all eyes on this game. I think this is the game where Burrow really starts to excel, and he starts kind of imposing his skill and his talent on the field. It's another week of Jamar Chase. It's another week of T. Higgins. It's another week of getting the skill players together. T Higgins again. We know what's going on with him with his kind of anger issues or whatever's going on with him. And Jamar Chase has got the contract stuff, hanging over his head. So I can see a situation where Burrow just rallies the troops and says, I'm the only one that can stop this guy in the league. Let's go out there. Let's make a statement, and let's make sure that America's talking about us tomorrow morning. And I think I like the Bengals in this game. I think they've got their number over the last number of years. They're really the only team that can put it up to them. The Bills have tried. Everybody else in the AFC has tried, but I like Bengals in this game. I like them by 4.
Brian, do you think that Burrow has the key to unlock Arrowhead, or is it going to be as the bookies predict?
I think I would concur with Kieran in terms of they're one team that, outside maybe the Ravens, that have all the weapons to go in there and knock them off. I mean, we saw what they did in the championship game that year. Then they had the additional championship game where they lose in a field goal. But you touched on the Higgins and the Jamar Chase piece. Like that has to go away now. Like the season started, they haven't got their contracts. You got to look at your players in the locker room and say, "I'm bought into this." Contract or no contract. Like we know the way the NFL works. These type of things don't tend to navigate a way of being resolved during the season. It's always during the off season. They just have to put it to bed now and move on. And Burrow needs to kind of rally the troops, like you said. For me, last week we touched on it, the Patriots played so well. They dominated the front seven, dominated the line of scrimmage. I see that again with Chris Jones and this Chiefs team coming out, and their defense got to Lamar last weekend. We saw obviously the Ravens offensive line was struggling, missing players that were there last year. The cohesion was gone, and Trent Brown had a disaster for the Bengals last weekend. I see it kind of another difficult day. Zach Taylor's never won in week 2 as the head coach of the Bengals. I see it continuing. It's Chiefs for me, and he'll be 0-6 in his career as coaching. Week 2, 1-4. What was the number? 1-5 or something like that in terms of week 1, week 2. It's
1-10.
1-10. Sorry, so that's like. It is what it is. It's a difficult start. I touched on it weeks ago. This is lining up very nicely for the Chiefs to get over the line. Beat the Ravens, beat the Bengals already with the seeding so far away, but yet it's a big piece of the conversation already. It's a Chiefs victory for me.
No.
Yeah, I'm going Chiefs to win.
Right, we run on to Rams and Cardinals, the game with the tightest spread of the week. Cardinals 1 point. The Cardinals 1 point favorites in this one. Interesting. No, how do you see this one going?
I'm actually really looking forward to this game. Obviously, you mentioned the Cardinals are a 1 point favorite going in, but that's down to all these injuries the Rams have found themselves with on the offensive line. Obviously, Puka Nacua now has gone on to IR. So it's going to be a difficult day for the Rams to get things moving. I think Matthew Stafford is obviously a top class professional. You still have Cooper Kupp there. I think this team probably still have enough firepower to maybe put up enough. But you look at this Cardinals team. I mean, Kyler Murray, if he's on his game, can absolutely cause problems. They are going to obviously need to get Marvin Harrison Jr. into the game. That is one big disappointment from them last year. He had 3 targets with 1 reception for 4 yards, and that's not what they expect from this, potential superstar rookie coming in, who a lot of people thought was the best player in the draft. Obviously, James Conner there as well. They're gonna rely a lot on him. And I mean, this Cardinals team, the issue I have with them is defense. I don't think they can cause enough trouble on defense to win this game. You look at last weekend's game, and it really was a game of 2 halves for them, 17-0 up, and they give that lead away. And I just think they could probably do something similar again. I think the Rams will be good enough to score on them, and I don't think that the Cardinals will be able to overcome that. And I think the Rams will take what might be a high-scoring game, but I think it's going to be a fun, exciting game anyway between the two teams.
Brian, as Noel was saying, the Cardinals team set to be kind of an exciting watch this season based on what we saw last weekend. They are favoured in this one, but will they have enough to take down LA?
I think the favouritism was a bit lopsided, Conor. I think it's a lot down to the fact of the Rams and the nature of the injuries in which they picked up on Sunday Night Football, and obviously that kind of alludes to players not playing this week. They lose arguably their best wide receiver who's taken over from Kupp, and they're going in against a team. These matches are always quite tight, and Kyler Murray last weekend looked very effective in the first half, and once the Bills managed to kind of keep him in the pocket in the second half, if he's not getting outside of the pocket, they're not making plays. They struggled in the second half. He had 31 yards of total offense. I mean, that's not sustainable for any quarterback in the league to try go and get a victory. I still think we saw enough out of Rams. I think they were quite disappointed they didn't get that one on Sunday night. It was a big opportunity. I'm with Noel. I think the Rams will come out and win this game. I think it'll be high scoring affair, but I think the Rams will do enough. They've got to get this one over the line. Like they're suggesting as a team, as a dark horse this year, they can't be starting 0-2 in the division and lose a divisional game. So for me, it's the Rams.
Kieran, when people start doubting Sean McVay and saying people are out injured, that's usually when he manages to unearth somebody new. That's, after all, where Puka Nacua came from last year while he was filling in for an injured Cooper Kupp. The Rams tend to find a way to win this one. To be honest, I'm slightly surprised that they're underdogs here.
Oh, I'm stunned. When I saw the line, I had to do a double take. I couldn't believe that a team like the Cardinals were a 1-point favorite against the Rams after the Rams took the Lions so far last week. And that's locker room material for McVay. I mean, we're gonna bring up the O-line issues again, but there's a little bit of talk that Havenstein might be back and No Boom as well, that they may not miss the game, so that might change a little bit too. But the disrespect to the Rams is unbelievable. This is the team last Sunday Night Football, took the Lions really, really far and made it a real contest, and now they're almost being punked against the Cardinals team, who I do not rate whatsoever. I don't know if anyone saw the news today about Kyler Murray. He was asked about bringing Marvin Harrison more into the game. This is what he said. It's not my job. He said it's not his job to bring Marvin Harrison into the game. He said it's the offensive coordinator's job to give him the plays. So your leader, your quarterback, is telling Marvin Harrison Jr., the most heralded wide receiver coming out in a long time, that it's not the quarterback's job to throw it to him. Kyler Murray is A, he's not a leader. B, he's not a valued quarterback, in my opinion. I don't rate him. I never have. And when he starts coming out with things like this, my estimation of him goes even further down. I don't think the Cardinals have much. I expect them to get beat by probably 10. And I think a combination of the disrespect on the line and a combination of it's just a continuation of the antics out of Murray. It's juvenile. It really is. It's not my job to throw. It's not my job to get him involved in the game. It's just asinine when you hear stuff like that. And it's almost tantamount to what Shedeur Sanders was coming out with last week when he threw his entire O-line under the bus. Things that you say have deep resonation because everything is scrutinized to the last letter in the NFL. And when the rest of the players see that coming out of Kyler Murray's mouth, I mean, and again, this is a guy who didn't have any completions over 10 yards last week. For whatever we say about his play, he's not able to throw the ball downfield. He doesn't have the vision. The clip you saw of Marvin Harrison wide open, probably at 30 yards, but nobody near him. That's tantamount, and that's just a microcosm of Kyler Murray as a quarterback. I don't rate him. I don't think the Rams are going to have much difficulty with the Cardinals this week. I think they're going to win by 10, maybe 14. I think it's going to be a big win for the Rams.
Brian, if I was looking for a pick against the spread for your last man standing, I'd be piling on the Rams. I have to say that's my pick for this one.
Well, there was nobody selected the Connor. Sorry, nobody selected him. They all went for the Cardinals in the last man standing. Maybe they know more than we do. Maybe
we shall see. We are at Broncos next, where the Steelers come to town, having knocked off the Falcons last weekend. Steelers 3-point favourites in this one. They start Justin Fields for the second time, and Bears fans like myself and Noel will be counting the games where Fields gets to play, because if he plays 51% of the snaps, then the 6th-round pick that the Bears got for Fields is upgraded to a 4th-round pick. So that's a nice little side plot for nerdy Chicago fans as we go through the weekend. And Fields had a pretty nice game last weekend. He took care of the football for the most part. He just the one fumble, which qualifies as a good game from Justin in terms of holding on to the football. Didn't throw it for a huge amount of yards, but had a couple of one particularly nice completion to George Pickens. Steelers were obviously able to run the ball really well, and I think really the key to this game, however it's going to be on the other side, it's going to be what Mike Tomlin and what TJ Watt and co have dialed up for Bo Nix. You cannot see Bo having a happy day at the office against this Steelers defense. TJ Watt looks as good as he ever has. Broncos had a little bit, obviously they got Garrett Bowles on one side of the O-line, but his confrere on the other side, whose name I forget, that was the guy who was under pressure on the left side. TJ Watt's going to be lining up on the right all day long, and he's going to have his hands full, and I suspect Bo Nix is going to have his helmet full of grass for a lot of the game at the weekend, and I think that's going to be the key here. I think the Steelers come out of Denver with a win and go to 2-0 on the season. Brian?
And this is the recipe for Steelers victories, what we saw last week. It's going to be this way for the whole season, whether it's Justin Fields or Russell Wilson as quarterback, is make it as conservative as they possibly can on offense. Don't have your quarterback make many mistakes. I mean, the numbers don't jump off the charts of Justin Fields last weekend. I know he ran the ball effectively as well, but it's nothing stellar from a quarterback perspective. But it's just what they want. It's enough. And the problem for me with the Steelers team, and I probably think of further down the road, when they get into a situation against a proper offense and they're down by 2 scores, and then they have to try find their way back in the game, it's just not going to happen. But in these type of games, you touched on it there. Don't do anything crazy on offense. Allow our defense to essentially control the game. You got Watt last weekend, who wasn't double teamed. But the Falcons' offense, this was leads to sacks and struggling days for quarterbacks. And it'll be interesting to see what Sean Payton can put together in terms of a master plan offensively to, I suppose, combat against him. I think it'd be a similar type of game. I think it'd be close. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that the Steelers will go in there. This is for me. This is this scenario where people are getting carried away.
They'll chip him, Brian. There'll be more chips than Macari's.
Well, I'll eat the chips and I'll cash in on a Monday morning and I'll go with the Steelers. But I'm not comfortable with this. I think Sean Payton, if any coach in the league can scheme to get a victory. I was also looking at favoritism numbers. I mean, Mike Tomlin has negative wins when his team are favourite going into road games. I think he's 32 or 40, something to that number. He doesn't bode well when they go on the road and they're favourites. They tend to come out on the wrong side of it. But in this game, I think it's another difficult week for Broncos fans in terms of the development of their quarterback. They're going up against a strong defense. I don't think it'll be pretty. Steelers win.
No, does Justin have a field day? Does Bo get nixed? What's happening?
I think Bo may be getting next, to be quite honest with you. It's already been touched on. The Steelers seem happy enough to say, right, our defense is our strength. We are going to win games with this defense, and we just want that offense not to mess it up. They didn't trust Justin too much. They just wanted him to kind of manage the game, and I think that's the way it'll kind of go forward. I think for this game, up against Bo Nix, I think Bo Nix could be in big trouble. I really wasn't impressed watching him. He attempted 42 passes, completed 26 of them, and had 138 yards with 2 interceptions. And I think it's going to be another very, very tough day for him against this Steelers defense. But in terms of scores, I mean, I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers kicker ended up getting all their points again, because that's just the way this Steelers team kind of is. I don't rate this Broncos team at all. I know what Brian's saying about Peyton, but you know, sometimes you just don't have it there. It's not in the locker to pull it out. And at the moment, I don't think it is. I think this Steelers team will stifle that Broncos team, and you know they'll just about get enough points to win the game. I can't get on board with this Broncos team doing anything at all. They're not quite Pantherish for me, but they're not good.
Kieran, your pick before we go to Sunday Night Football.
Steel City all day.
All right, it's Bears at Texans in the Island game on Sunday night. Texans favoured by 6. No.
In some ways, I'm really looking forward to this game, and in some ways, I do not want this game to happen because it just may not go the way I'd like it to go. But look, I'll start with the Bears first. We look at that game at the weekend. Obviously, there's so much hype and so much pressure there for Caleb Williams, and it just didn't deliver on the day. But when you look at this Bears offense, you have a new rookie quarterback, you have a new running back, you have a new offensive coordinator, you have 2 new wide receivers in that room. And I think it all showed. I think it didn't click. It wasn't all right. Typical with the Bears, they relied on defense and special teams to stand up and to do the job. And I think there's a lot of work to be done on this Bears offense. And it all stems from that offensive line, which was horrific. They were okay on the tackles, but the interior of that line just absolutely got manhandled. I mean, Coleman Shelton was in there. I thought, you know what, for once we might have an actual centre. A centre who can go in. He may not be the best centre in the league, but he can go in and do a job, and they can all kind of work off that. But he was atrocious. Then obviously you look at Nate Davis is swapping with Ryan Bates. They said, oh, that was the plan. We were always going to do it. No, I don't know what's going on there. Nate Davis just doesn't seem switched in at all. So for me, this Bears offense is a worry. I want Shane Waldron to step it up because Cole Kmet was on for 48% of the snaps, which, you know, this is the guy who just paid $50 million to. You want him out there. So that has to be fixed. I think the Bears defense will do a good job. I think they'll step it up. I just don't think they'll be able to hold it out for the full game against this Texans offense, which, look, we've talked many times about this Texans offense and the players they have out there. CJ Stroud in year 2 is just a phenomenal looking quarterback. They bring Stephon Diggs in with Tank Dell there in the wide receiver room. Again, Nico Collins is there. They are so awesome there. And then Joe Mixon comes in and looks like a world beater. Maybe that move from him has just reinvigorated him. He's gone into a really good team, a really strong team. And I think this Texans team will have way too much on offense to let the Bears anywhere near them. And I think they may beat them in the end by 10, 14 points. I think the Bears defense just won't be able to hold out for that long.
Yeah, I never had this one penciled as a win, and I didn't see anything last weekend to make me think any differently from a Chicago perspective for a lot of the reasons you've outlined there, Noel. And you touched on one of them that would give me a lot of pause for thought as a Chicago fan, if you were hoping that the Bears can pull out the upset, which is the Texans can run the ball now. That was probably one of their big flaws that they needed to address last season. They've done that. I think bringing in Diggs has given an even greater spotlight to Nico Collins now, because it takes a little bit of managing and it helped free him up. I mean, that was a great connection last year. That's something I think that we're going to get used to watching for many a long year to come, hopefully. CJ Stroud is just a joy to behold. We're very lucky to have him in the league, and it's interesting that this matchup pits the guy that a lot of people hoped, at least from a Chicago perspective, would be this year's CJ Stroud. But, you know, when you watch CJ, you realize how infrequently this actually happens, where a rookie quarterback comes in and plays like a veteran and just takes off. It's been amazing, and it's testament to the work that he put in the off season when he transitioned out of college football. What a great coaching job. D'Amico Ryans and the offensive coordinator there to help me out here. It's Bobby
Sloak.
Anyway, what a great job they've done, and I think, you know, that's going to prove too much for Chicago to handle. I think the Bears defense really stepped it up last weekend, won the game against the Titans. You know, it's only the third time in history that a team has managed to come back from double digits down without scoring an offensive touchdown. But, you know, as I said, with Anthony Richardson throwing 60-yard bombs, that's not a sustainable formula for success either. I think the Bears offense will be better this weekend. They can hardly be any worse. And I don't think week one is going to define how Caleb Williams plays. And we talked about the Texans running the ball. We'd also love to see if the Bears can actually run it, because DeAndre Swift didn't get much going on last weekend, and nor did the rest of the Bears running attack. And that's going to be something that they'll really have to be able to do, and not only in this game but going forward. But it's not going to be on for them this weekend, I feel. Kieran.
Yeah, I just touching back on the Caleb Williams stuff. I saw pretty much every game he played for USC. He was sacked 80 times, 8-0 during his time at USC. And I'm still concerned about his pocket presence. I'm concerned about his ability to, you know, be mobile in the pocket and to see problems as they develop. We saw him scramble a lot, and that's really what the Bears kind of fell in love with, when that O-line, he had a paper-thin O-line in front of him at USC, which meant he was scrambling a lot and making these magical plays. And that's a lot of the stuff that we've seen with him, with the Bears, making a lot of those nice throws he had last week, even though he didn't throw for more than 100 yards. But still, you know, the other thing is the run game for the Bears. I mean, Swift only went, I think he had 30 yards on 10 rushes on Sunday, and that's not going to help you at all. But I think what's going to happen is, you know, after the Bears went down so much, you know, they went pass heavy because they were looking for a more balanced offense. They couldn't see anything going on with Swift. Joe Mixon went off last week. He really did. And that's a huge problem on the horizon for the Bears. He was unstoppable, 159 yards for a touchdown. And he ran it 30 times. I mean, who saw that coming? They definitely didn't do that with Singletary. You know, we've talked about that wide receiver room with Tank Dell and Diggs and Nico Collins, but they ran it 30 times. And that's something that I would be scared of if I was a Bears fan. They allowed 103 rushing yards last week, which is not terrible, but, you know, you match that up with what Mixon was able to do last week. It's going to be a really tough matchup for the Bears. I know the Texans wrapped up Jonathan Taylor last week, and they're going to have to, you know, the Bears are going to have to, you know, find some magical way of releasing DeAndre Swift and doing some work, because that's going to be a tough, not just a tough offense to have to deal with, but we've talked about that defense. I mean, you know, Derek Stingley Jr., Daniil Hunter, Jimmy Ward, that's another team up there that's stacked, you know, front to back. And I think when it's all said and done, Houston they're gonna be good for the -7 and probably win by 10.
Brian?
The Texans are the model for the likes of the Bears who want to get to that level in terms of what they've built over the last year. And I think the Bears are trying to strive to get to that kind of situation for the young quarterback coming in and a head coach. But this is where we're going to see the reality of where one team is against the other. It's Texans all day for me.
Okay, finally we get to Monday Night Football, where the two birds clash as the Falcons take on the Eagles at the Link. Eagles favoured by 7. Brian?
I think one of the most concerning things from last week was Kirk Cousins' performance. He just didn't look, and I acknowledge, and I touched on it earlier, overreaction week, Monday, first weekends, but it looked like the injury from last year was still kind of lingering there. He's, in terms of his velocity in the throws, it just didn't look like Kirk Cousins of old. And I wouldn't say I was the biggest Kirk Cousins fan, but we've all kind of recognized he's a serviceable quarterback, and we can understand why the Falcons went out to get him. I know it's week 1. He went into, as it happens, he went to Philadelphia in week 2 last year as the Vikings quarterback, and he played quite well on a Thursday night game, but ultimately came up short. And I think it's the same scenario this year. I think this Monday night, I think the Eagles defense will make it a difficult evening for them. And let's bear in mind, the Eagles team, once they were in Brazil, they've had 8 or 9 days to recover. They've had extra additional time. I think it's an Eagles victory all day long.
No chance of a Sao Paulo hangover, do you think?
No, I can't see it. I think the Eagles are too strong. We see the amount of points they put up there against the Packers, and I think the Cardinals will have a lot of trouble slowing them down. You look at it the opposite end. I don't think the Falcons. I don't think the Falcons will have what it takes to get to Jalen Hurts. I completely agree with Brian when it comes to Cousins. It just didn't look right for him. He didn't look like he was over that injury. And I just think that when all's said and done, I think the Eagles are way too strong. The Falcons have a lot of work to do. They have some impressive young players there, and if they hit like Bijan Robinson, I like obviously Mooney, who was at the Bears, who I think is a good player. Kyle Pitts got a touchdown last week. I mean, if these players, Drake London can hit form, they are good young players. But I just think this Eagles team is too strong, and they should run out fairly comfortable winners.
One bright spot from a Falcons perspective for me, Grady Jarrett back, recovered from the injury, picked up a sack last week. They'll hope that he can continue that workload and continue that kind of success against the Eagles. That might be one bright spot, but I don't see too many others. As you say, Noel, I think they desperately need Bijan to go off here. That's going to be a tough assignment. Protecting Kirk Cousins is not going to be any easier than it was against the Steelers. You can see the Eagles getting after him with that formidable front seven that they have. I thought, by the way, from an Eagles perspective, Quinyon Mitchell looks to have slotted very well into that secondary, which was a problem for the Eagles last season. We talked about the trouble that Terrion Arnold had in his first outing with the Lions. Quinyon Mitchell, was targeted early and often against the Packers, but stood up really, really well, had a great game, and that's something that the rest of the NFC will be sitting up and taking notice of as we go through this season. Homestand for Philly, I don't see there being too much difficulty here. I think they'll cover that 7 pretty easily. I think they're going to win by 10 plus. Kieran, what do you think?
Fly, Eagles, fly on the road to victory. Yeah, Eagles big.
All right. There we leave it. We're back Monday at 9 o'clock to recap all the main talking points from Sunday. We'll also have our instant reaction pod available when the games close from 2 a.m. going into Monday morning, so you can have that one locked and loaded for the early morning commute. And I remind you once again, wherever you pick that up on your podcast platform, please do like and subscribe. We'll talk to you very soon.